Good morning, everyone. I am Ernesto Burden, publisher of New Hampshire Business Review, and it's my pleasure to welcome you today to our webinar, Securing Your Legacy, Succession Planning for Optimal Transactional Value. The webinar today is sponsored by Albin, Randall, and Bennett, and we are going to be joined by three panelists: David Jean, of Albin Randall Bennett, Frederick Lipp of Bernstein Schur, and Stephen Tenney of Great Diamond Partners. We will hear from them each individually, and then all three of them will come on screen together, and we will answer any questions that you might have. So without further ado, let us jump right in with David. David, welcome.
Thank you for the introduction, Ernesto. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending today's presentation, where we're truly honored to be here today. Today's topic is really about securing a legacy and maximizing the value of your business. Every business owner is going to exit their business, either voluntarily or involuntarily. Today, we'll be focusing on the importance and benefits of planning early. So let's begin by talking about the benefits of planning early. And this is certainly not an all-inclusive list, but I did want to highlight some of the more important benefits of planning early. I always say, time is our friend. The more we have time to plan, the better the outcome. And planning early can really significantly raise the business value of your company. So as we look to plan our exit strategy, we do everything that we want to do to maximize the value of the business so that when it is time to exit, we can have the best outcome that's possible. Another part is identifying value gaps and transferability obstacles as a really key starting point ahead of time. So if your business is worth $5 million and you really need to have a value of $10 million to meet your exit financial goals, then we know what the gap is, and then we can put into place a strategy to get us to where we need to be. Creating a smooth transition that benefits the employee and the buyer, establishing clear priorities, strategies, and timeframes, having a plan, understanding what those milestones and when those milestones need to be completed. Minimize income taxes and maximize the value of proceeds upon the eventual exit, which is really important. And by planning early, we have the ability to really plan to maximize the value. So again, as I said before, time is really our friend, and the more time, the more options and the more flexibility we have. Accelerating the transfer, once we're in a good planning stage, then when it comes to actually do the execution or the transition, we've already been prepared. We've already done a lot of the legwork. We've already done a lot of the advanced planning so that the transition is going to be a lot faster and a lot smoother. And really, preventing, costly mistakes by planning ahead. Most business owners only exit once in their lifetime, so we want to make sure that we get it right, and that's really important to make sure that we avoid those potential mistakes down that road. Next slide, please. So if planning is so easy and it's so important, then why isn't everyone doing it? Well, there are some inherent barriers to exit planning. And for starters, a lot of business owners have few outside interests. The business oftentimes is a family member. It's not unusual for business owners to be working in their business for 30, 40 years, working 5, 6, 7 days a week. And because of that, they're dedicated so much time to their business that they're really not involved in a lot of outside activities. Owners are willing to develop successors in the fear of maybe perhaps leaving, leaving and becoming a competitor. So there's always that fear that we don't want to develop our successors. Unaware of transfer options and perceived complexity, depending upon the size of your company, the complexity of the company. There are a lot of different paths, and some of those paths require significant planning, and there's some complexity that goes along with it. A perfect example, if you're interested in an employee stock ownership plan, there's a lot of complexity and advanced plan that really needs to get done before you go through the ESOP conversion. Owners don't want to think about retirement, right? It's a sense of mortality that, when I retire, what am I going to do? I don't have a lot of interest. I really, really enjoy working. I enjoy coming to the office every day. So the idea of doing something and going to the next stage of life can be very frightening and intimidating for many business owners. So there's always that lag or that sense of urgency to plan. Owners working on the business are not in it. As we know, business owners are very much very tactical. They deal with day-to-day issues, day-to-day things in their business, and sometimes they don't take the time to take a step back and really look at things more holistically, globally, and really strategically. And that can be a real barrier for many business owners. Family succession is for family-owned businesses. This is probably at the top of the list. Sometimes you have children who are involved in the business. Other times you may have other children that are not in the business. So it's all about equity versus fairness. What's the value of the company? How do I if I transfer the value at a discount, how do I balance that in my estate for my non-business active children? Also, you see many situations where there are multiple family members, children within a business, and they all contribute at different levels. And we're faced with the same question: how do we make it equitable and how do we make it fair? Because not everyone contributes at the same level. Owners willing to relinquish control their business, they want to hand over the reins. So sometimes it's difficult for business owners to want to relinquish control and take a step back and really develop the next generation and really develop the bank strength of the business. Bank strength of any business is probably the most important value driver out there. That is sort of the mother of all value drivers. It's really important to have the strongest bench you can possibly have, regardless if an inside transfer or an outside transfer. Fear of running out of money after exit. We never want to be a burden to our children. And behind the fear of dying, that's the second biggest fear is fear of running out of money. How much money do you need? How much is enough? And once you exit the business, then there really isn't that incoming sources of income. So there is some real fear about not having enough money to make it through your lifetime. And if you look at these barriers, many of them are really emotional rather than practical. Even for business owners who are independently, financially set, they're still reluctant to exit because of some of those emotional barriers. Next slide, please, Sarah. So, question we always ask when we meet with someone that is planning to exit, oftentimes don't know what question to ask. How do we start the process? What do I need to start to think about before we can begin the exit planning process? And there really are three important questions. The first question really is establishing a target date. When is the business owner want to start to scale down? Not necessarily 100% exit, but perhaps spending some more time in Florida, or not coming in 5 days a week or 6 days a week. And eventually, when do you want to completely exit the business? So for many business owners, it's really a transition of responsibilities and involvement over a period of time. But we need to know the when. The second thing we need to know is how much. So for many business owners, the value of the company is really their largest, retirement money pot, so to speak. So understanding what the business owner needs on an after-tax basis after the exit is really, really important. Take into account the value of the business, their retirement, perhaps some rental real estate, perhaps there's other investments that they may have, and understanding what the owner needs to receive on an after-tax basis is very, very important. If you're in a situation where you've got a business owner who's independently, financially independent, then perhaps maximizing the value of the business, particularly if it's a family or an inside deal, may not be as important as it is for some other business owners who are really relying on the value of the business. Then the next question is the who, the choice of the successor. If it's an inside, is it a family member? Is it key employee or a key employee group? ESOPs have certainly gained popularity over the past few years as a really great exit pathway for many businesses. So ESOPs have gained a lot of popularity where it's really is, for all intents and purposes, really an inside transfer. Then we're also seeing a rise of co-ops, which sort of is a hybrid ESOP. And we're finding that can be particularly effective for a smaller type business as well. Then the third option is really unrelated third party. It could be a financial buyer. It could be a strategic buyer. It could be a competitor. It could be a private equity firm. In terms of private equity, you see a tremendous rise of private equity acquisitions, as well as venture capital, or a combination of them. So unrelated third party for many business owners could be the ideal pathway to an exit plan. So those are the three really important questions that need to be addressed before we really can begin the exit planning process. That will provide us focus to go down those pathways. And the last thing is really to build an exit planning advisory team. So there's a lot of different disciplines that are involved, valuation, tax planning, legal, financial planning, banking. And it's really important to make sure that you have a team, more importantly, a collaborative team that is really looking out for the owner's best interests and helping them meet their financial as well as their non-financial objectives. So that kind of summarizes really the importance of advanced planning with respect to exit planning. So now I would like to turn the mic over to Steve Tenney.
Okay, great. Thank you, David. Appreciate that. And it's good to be part of this. I thank you to the New Hampshire Business Review and Alan Randall Bennett for putting this on. I have spent nearly my whole life in Maine, but I did start in the business in New Hampshire, 10 Park Street, right across from the Capitol in Concord, and spent a lot of time driving around Cheshire County down to Hinsdale, over to Rindge, Hancock, Keene, and everything in between. I've got a great affinity for the state. I really liked how David started on all of this, and from the perspective of a lot of the issues are really based around psychology, if you will. And if you look at all of the disciplines that are needed that David mentioned, and put them on a Venn diagram, you're going to find that there's a huge overlap in the middle. Fred, David, and I, and many others have a lot of the core concepts and expertise nailed down pretty well. Then you move to the outside of that Venn diagram. That's where our specialties lie. What I'm going to do in my comments is I'm going to structure them starting off in the middle and then moving towards the outside. So the three parts are do it anyway, get into some broad financial planning topics, and then get very specific, moving out into the outside of that Venn diagram to retirement income planning. Next slide. In David's introduction, he talked about maximizing the value of your company. So let's assume for the moment that everybody on this webinar, all the business owners want a profitable company. They want to grow. They want a great culture. Doing the right things for all of that are exactly the same things you need to be doing to be selling or transferring your business. So all of the smart planning that goes on and smart managing, that leads directly to maximizing the value. So what I would strongly suggest is think of yourself as a buyer. Get a great checklist from David of here are the list of things that you need to do to prepare your company to be ready to sell. He talked about value gaps. That's the same thing that I'm talking about here. And walk into your company and say, how am I doing on all of these items? If you can nail those down, you're going to automatically be in a stronger position as a company anyway, and stronger when it comes to selling or transferring the business. So I'm just going to touch on a few. One is mitigating risks. You might have, 50 or 60% of your revenue come from one client. That's an issue. Do you have the right contracts with vendors, with customers, with key employees? Do you have the right insurances in place, legal structures? How's your debt? All of those are risks. I am by no means suggesting that we eliminate all risks. As entrepreneurs, we are meant to take risks. That's how we succeed. We identify great risks and we go hard after them. The key is to identify what those risks are and then figure out which ones should we mitigate. Okay, it's not eliminating, it's just identifying and then mitigating some. Next is systems. So I would ask a question, what would happen if you go to Tahiti? You go to the South Pacific, there's no Wi-Fi for a month. How would the company do? Are there systems in place while you're gone where the company just keeps on humming? So do you have systems for what I would say anything that you do more than once, you need a system? Is there a system for sales, for customer service, for manufacturing, for internal functions like HR? All of these things need systems so that a buyer can step in and the company's already in great shape. That makes the company more valuable. Next is growth. Are you growing? That certainly makes the company more valuable to you as the owner and possibly a buyer. If you're not growing at least an industry level, why not? Dig into it. And lastly, management. And I'm going to hit on this in two different areas. One, I talked about you going off to Tahiti. One of the best conversations I ever had, best pieces of advice I ever got was from a gentleman named Kevin Hancock. Some of you may have heard of Kevin. He's the 6th generation owner of Hancock Lumber here in Maine, based in Casco. And he said, Steve, you've got to make yourself less important. By making yourself less important, you empower others to do an incredible job. And Hancock Lumber does a better job of this than just about anyone I've ever come across. So you as a manager, as the owner, need to be strong enough to release the reins. You also want to make sure you've got the right people in the right seats at those key levels. And if you've got all that lined up, you're going to be in great shape. Next slide. Moving on to financial planning. David just touched briefly on estate planning or legacy planning. The big suggestion I have for you here is do not do it at the same time as you are executing a transaction. Both can consume your mental space that you have remaining after you're busy running the business. I would suggest you do this far in advance. It can always be changed. And you're looking at things like what's really important to you, who is important to you, and those are questions that you've got to do free from distractions. Next, personally, is risk mitigation. Again, we're not trying to eliminate risks. We want to identify them and then mitigate what might be there. A lot of times it's very easy, maybe with property and casualty insurance or maybe the right legal structure. Tax planning. I don't want to go too far into this because that's really David's area, but the one thing I would say, the one specific item is philanthropy. Charitable giving is important to a lot of people. It's a great time or opportunity to engage in philanthropic giving at the same time that you're selling your business. Selling a business generally is going to result in a tax burden that can be partially offset with philanthropy. And it can really be fairly easy. If you donor advised fund, it can be giving money directly to a charity or maybe a state foundation. And lastly, retirement planning. And for that, I'm just going to go to the next slide. again, David talked about some psychological issues, and there's a really important psychological issue at play here I have seen happen time and time again. You, as the business owner, walk through the door every day. You can see your company, you can touch it, you might smell it, you can hear it. It's a very tangible thing. When you sell the business and you've got proceeds and you move to, let's call it investments, the capital markets, that is intangible. You're going from a source of income that is very predictable, that you can relate to and you know cold, to something that might be kind of new to you. So it can be very unsettling, especially because pricing in the capital markets is minute to minute, second to second. Pricing on your business is not. So it can be very unsettling. So what do you do about it? First step, identify the sources of income and obligations or expenses. Just line them up on a simple spreadsheet. Next is build predictable streams of income. Those predictable streams might be Social Security, the proceeds from the sale of the business, could be dividends and interest from stocks and bonds, required minimum distributions from retirement accounts, could be rent. Okay, you might retain the land, you might retain the building that the business is in, and they might be paying you rent. To the extent possible, it's a great idea to cover as many of your expenses with those predictable streams of income. The reason that's important is because then you don't have to worry about the vagaries of the capital markets. You don't have to worry about values going up and down. You can just rely on the income. Lastly, when it comes to that income, look for sources of income that can grow the income stream, not grow the principal, but grow the income stream. Most of us are aware of the fact that Social Security generally increases payments based on a cost of living allowance or inflation. Again, if you're renting the building or the land, you might have an escalator where you fix a payment term for a year or 3 years or 5 years, but then you can increase that rent due to inflation. Same thing applies to the capital markets. And I would encourage you to consider investments, generally stocks that today might be paying you less, let's say 2 or 2.5%, not much, but they're going to increase their dividends by 8 to 10% a year. Over time, that will do a great job in offsetting the impacts of inflation. So with that, I'm going to turn to my very good friend and expert, Fred Lipp.
Here. Okay, here we go. Steve, thank you very much. I'm Fred Lipp from Bernstein Schur. We have offices in Manchester, New Hampshire, and Portland, Maine. It's a great honor to be here. I'd like to say that Ernesto Burden worked very hard, I know, in wordsmithing the title, which is quite hopeful and which, as David and Steve have outlined, encompasses a lot. So I am friends with David, Jean, and Steve Tenney. I've known them a long time. I value their professional and personal insights highly. And so I'm going to dare to editorialize here. I'm not going to be the so careful, egg-headed, revenge of the nerds lawyer that is just so very safe in general. Rather, I'm going to dare to teach towards the title and anticipate what might be relevant to you as you consider your legacy and moving forward next steps. So to do that, I'm going to go through 10 points. And again, they might be a reach. They may be in part my personal opinion, but based on 3 decades as a business lawyer in Northern New England, I hope they hit the mark for you. Point number 1, be intentional in creating your legacy. After all, this program is about securing your legacy. So what does that mean for you in your business? What is your legacy? I think it is interesting how successful professional athletes are able to anticipate and visualize their success. And I believe that the same is true for successful businesses. When New Hampshire Business Review comes to you for one of their articles and asks you what you're about and where you've been and where you are and where you're going, you should be able to describe that in clear terms. Similarly, when an employee asks you where they're positioned in your business and where the company is going, you should be able to articulate that legacy and that vision. I'm going to give you a few examples of clear visions which I've seen and the success of those companies and why I believe they're legacies and why I believe we can take our own positions in our own companies and our own sectors and understand the context for each of these examples, which I'll call proof of context. The first, we've done some big deals with spirits companies, literally hundreds of millions of dollars, life-changing money for the founder and the owners. And in those moments, certainly that is a huge legacy. And there's nothing shameful about making massive amounts of money, because what we've seen is that those individuals have taken the funds and have gone on to create floors of hospitals and to build schools, parks, and other things in the nonprofit community. So certainly that is a legacy. But another example I think of was a PhD in cellular biology, in the biotech sector. And he identified a protein chain that could protect healthy cells during chemotherapy to prevent the wasting effects of chemo. And ultimately came to a point where he realized that he couldn't do it on his own and private equity wasn't the right fit. So he ultimately signed the rights to his patent. It was a great payday for him. But ultimately he saw his own vision for his legacy go to a company that could realize that vision in a way that he could not. 2 summers ago, I closed a transaction for a major Boston-based insurance company, sold to a Chicago-based insurance company, which was actually much larger. But the founders had been involved in this since the great-grandfather's time, and one of their primary objectives was that business not leave that town in Massachusetts. And so we were able to write into the documents that for a certain period of time, it would stay in place. And the last one, and this is kind of fun because it's actually a David Jean client. This is perhaps the best one. Not so long ago, we closed a deal at the end of a year for the owner of a grocery store in a small northern New England town. And everyone loved this person. And in a lot of these closings, we don't actually get to go to the closing. So we're doing it on Zoom like this, but everything's buttoned down and it's sort of a formality. But when he came out of his office beside the butcher's counter, his employees were there clapping and they escorted him out front, and there was a fire truck waiting, and he jumped aboard and they took him downtown through the streets, and the whole town had turned out to applaud him and to celebrate his legacy. And I would suggest that when they send the fire truck for you on your last day of ownership, you've done something well. So I hope you take those examples as you're considering the value of this program. I'm going to get into some of the more sort of what I would call substantive legal suggestions, but have that as a backdrop, because as far as I know, we go around once, and so these events are meaningful. Point number 2, build loyalty across your team. I know that both David and Steve have spoken to this point. Steve, for example, referenced Kevin Hancock's view on this, which I fully agree. And so how do you build loyalty? You bring your employees closer. Really, that's fundamental to your business. I'll give you a few examples. There is a company down the road from here. I set them up, I think 15 years ago. They're a professional services firm, but in the first 10 years, they went from 2 professionals to 60 plus support staff. Now, they did not do any profit sharing. They, to my knowledge, they didn't even do bonuses. There's no fancy structure for sharing sort of the upside. But what they did give, and which they were very capable of doing, were showing respect. And so they go to Tough Mudder events and to the Red Sox and to the Patriots. They compensated their employees very, very well. And as a result, the business has been highly successful. There are, as David Jean has outlined, more complex bonus programs that you should be considering. So let's tackle a few of those. You can give stock. A lot of people call up, say, listen, things are going so great. I do want to give my CEO or my CFO or my chief technology officer, I'd like to give them stock. But they're a point in the progression of the business where the company is actually valued quite highly. And if you think of that, when you receive stock at that point, the employee has income, it's compensation. So if you are in an earlier stage of your company, what you can do before the valuation has increased is you can set forth a stock bonus program with restricted stock. Again, the value of the stock is quite low. And when they receive it, you will pay tax on the ordinary income. Again, fair market value is lower. And you'll do what we call an 83B election, where you'll let the IRS know you're receiving the stock at this stage. You're going to pay whatever taxes are applicable at that point. And then at the later date, while you'll be taxed on the appreciated value, it's a great way to get in earlier. So rather than trying to fumble around and not be able to do it with a late stage company, the entrepreneur is able to affirm their team in that way. Another piece, I really do appreciate the benefit of a stock appreciation rights agreement. So you're not giving them stock, but what you're doing is effectively taking a snapshot in the company's value as of this time. And then there's a vesting period. And when they leave the company, you're taking a new snapshot of the business, and the appreciated value during the duration of that employee's employment, they receive some percentage of that upside, and they will be paid either when they leave or through some term of years. But that's another helpful way to really give people skin in the game so that they feel valued in the business. Another thing, when you go into the crunch time of selling a business, as Steve Tenney said, that's a really tough time to have all of this in order. You want to do it in advance. But your CEO and your other officers work incredibly hard at the time of selling the business. It's incredibly stressful. Mind you, they're doing their own regular job, but now they're dealing with the prospective buyer, all the details of that. Your IT person is uploading information to the data room. Your human resources person is scurrying around providing all the details regarding vacation and other accrued benefits. And that is a huge stress. And so it's not unusual that businesses at that time determine that there is some bonusing that they're going to give to those people as specific to sort of, we'll call it the red zone of closing a sale. Point number 3. In this instance, it's maximize the transactional value of your business. And I have come to believe that the strength of a company's brand and its intellectual property are the greatest value accelerators in M&A transactions. I'm going to make a few points. The first is vodka. I've had the benefit, I don't know why they find me. I don't mind a cocktail. I'm not a huge drinker. I couldn't tell you if I could differentiate one vodka from another, but I have represented several major vodka brands. And those that have really hit it and those that have not have been based on their marketing campaign and their name and their logo. It is fascinating. And my suggestion is if you take the lessons of the large spirits companies, that can be applied to your own business. Really, it's branding, branding, branding. It is amazing how that is an accelerator of value. Another piece is embrace the creative economy. You know, that means all different things to various people, but think about artistic companies in your communities and how they've been so successful in ways you would not imagine. We have a client right now that is an artist putting vending machines across the country into museums and other areas, and doing it in a way that will truly create revenue sources in a way they could not otherwise had they just had their traditional studio in their community. I'm a huge believer in plumbing international markets. Think about your business, think about the world, pull out a world map, whether you're sourcing product or selling or licensing intellectual property. Truly, the world is your oyster. And I think that is a missed opportunity. I've spent most of my career in M&A and buying and selling companies. But the other piece has been thinking about how to be creative in international markets in order to maximize that income. The next thing is joint venture opportunities. You're doing what you're doing, but we know that complementary skills and knowledge and branding and competencies and manufacturing joined with another company that has complementary elements that you don't have is amazing. And by putting them together, typically you set up a new LLC. That LLC is owned jointly by the two companies. The liability is insulated because it's owned within this new entity. Typically, you have the formalities of licensing or having contracts to the extent that you're contributing knowledge or assets to that separate entity. But that, I think, is how you really hit. And again, it reflects an element of creativity that will allow you to be successful and ultimately make more money at the time of exit. Point number 4, be proactive in shoring up any weakness in your business. Steve spoke about plugging value gaps. I'm in full agreement. Have your corporate house in order. Have your business and your HR house in order. And I have here what is a document that we use. It's form-based. We use this when we're representing actually the buyer. It is sent by the counsel to the seller's lawyer, and it outlines all of the questions you can imagine to make sure that their house is in order. So financial matters and corporate matters and material contracts and employee and environmental, all of it. And if you send me an email, I'd be happy to send this to you. But what it'll allow you to do is go through, and it will be a helpful checklist so that you do not get caught flat-footed down the road when it shows up. And you'll plug those gaps and you'll be ready. And as a result, there'll be no diminution in the value of your business. And as a result, you'll be able to argue any bad facts that exist. No company's perfect. There's a soft underbelly to any organization that is endured, but you'll be able to be proactive so that some egg-headed lawyer doesn't think they found something in the data room, an aha moment. Look, we can go and we can negotiate this, and the purchase price really is a ruse, or let's push through, and we're going to hold back some of the purchase price to hedge against that risk. No, you be the one to argue the bad fact. You be the one to describe the solution, to describe the insurance that is in place, or some fix that will happen pending closing. Point number 5, you should really leverage the opportunity to assemble a board of advisors. You might have a board of directors, but the board of advisors are separate. I'm on one right now. It's been a huge time drain, but I did it because I knew I would enjoy it, and I have. You don't get paid. Maybe there's a nice dinner out, but if you are a company and you see people that are in your community, they would be flattered to be asked. It allows you to typically meet quarterly with them. But what it does is it allows you to have objective people that are not owners, that are not officers, that are not directors, to quiz you regarding the future of the business, whether your legacy is in fact on track. And businesses quietly can be runners to determine whether there could be a buyer in the community, whether there might be a joint venture partner. Really, they're quiet allies that will help you because they know it's good for you, and ultimately, it's good for our business communities. Point number 6, goodness. Again, as Steve was saying, develop an estate plan. You probably all have wills. You probably have a loved one who's your personal representative. But if you die tomorrow or you encounter a disability, that personal representative, while may be very caring, may not know the ins and outs of your business. So what do? Typically, we set up a revocable trust. We designate a trustee. Sometimes that trustee addresses sort of the broader family issues of the family, but the business trustee is empowered, someone that you really do trust and to make these key decisions. So the trust owns the stock, and that business trustee makes decisions regarding officers, regarding the future of the business, whether to sell it or not. And if you on that, I think it's something that would be hugely important and also to put your mind at ease. Point number 7, we're near the end here, right? So we're going to be on time for our allotted Q&A period. But 7 is position the company for strategic sale. Now, mind you, the title of this program is Planning for Optimal Transactional Value. It doesn't mean maximum. It doesn't mean that you're going to try and get necessarily the absolute most money you can get, because it's consistent with a legacy. It's perhaps finding a path for your business after you leave, which you feel good about, rather than just grinding the last penny. I will bet that for those of you that have thought about transitioning the business to a child or a relative or a group of employees, that is likely to happen. Right? That is, in many cases, the eventual buyer. And And so I would suggest that when you do that, make sure that the purchase price is not so low that the IRS comes in and sort of calls it into question. You don't want an audit when you sell it to your child. So if it's a $5 million business, sell it at fair market value rather than 1 million. And similarly, observe the formalities that you would with any third-party buyer, meaning typically you've got a promissory note if it's cash at closing. Often it is seller finance. So you've got a promissory note, but secure it with a stock pledge. So if the person to whom you have envisioned receiving the business cannot pay, you can pull back all of the interest. You can sort of re-solidify the business and start again. The other piece is, and David mentioned this, often it's a strategic sale. So often you already know who that buyer is going to be. They're either your supplier, they're your joint venture partner. They're usually someone who is close to you. And so every day is a tryout. Every day in the interactions between your team and there is a tryout for that prospective sale. It happens so frequently, I cannot underemphasize this. The people that are likely the buyers of your business, and sure, strategic private equity and those that understand the sector, but so often it's people that you know and you trust, and as a result, they appreciate the value of your company. Point 8, structure the transaction to avoid follow-on liability. Sure that you have caps in your liability, meaning some percentage above which the buyer cannot come back and ask for your contribution through indemnification. And goodness, have a basket. You don't want to be nickeled and dimed after you sell your company. At least it ought to be 0.5% of the purchase price. So $1 million, anything that is under accumulated $50,000 amount, leave me alone. Don't bug me when I've left the business and sold it to you. Make sure you have that effectively what is effectively a basket, and think of it as a deductible, right? Point number 9, structure the transaction to maximize upside. There are so many different ways to do business valuation, and there are experts in this, and this is what they do. But I will bet you dollars to donuts that if you took a napkin right now and you wrote the value of your company that you know to be, and how much you need in order for you to retire on, as Steve Tenney was saying, how much you need, I'll bet you know what that number is. And do it for fun. Write it down and then put it in your pocket, and then go and have someone do a calculated multiples of EBITDA or some other calculation as to what the value of your business is in that particular sector. And I'll bet ultimately when you get to the closing table, your number is probably the one that will be right. And finally, and again, as I see, I'm right on target here, my 10th point is celebrate your success and move forward in your own likeness, right? So what typically happens through your personal and professional odysseys after the sale will be so very telling, right? I mean, some go to work for the buyer. Most often that's tough because you're remembering what it was like when you owned and ran the company. But if there is a acquiring party rolling up companies, you may find it fascinating that if you're a travel agency and you've sold your travel agency, you might not go to that particular location in Manchester or Portsmouth or Portland, but you might help them roll up businesses because you know the sector. Or some founders run it back. You know the business, your non-compete period runs out, and you do something similar to what you knew and were involved in before. Or lastly, you may do what our friend, the gentleman that owned the supermarket did. He bought a place on Lake Winnipesaukee, and he bought a place in Naples, Florida, and he owns a boat in both locations, and he's having the time of his life. And if in fact that turns out to be your legacy, then we'd like to hear about it. Send us a postcard. And with that, I'd like to turn the panel over to Ernesto. And I look forward to receiving some questions with our team, and I'm grateful for the opportunity to connect with you all.
Thank you, Frederick. Welcome back, David. Frederick, please keep your video on if you like. We're we're going to all have a conversation here for the next 13 minutes or so, and with questions. And I do want to stress for the listeners out there, you can put questions in the Q&A. Look for that, type the questions in, and I will be sure to get to them. And I have some myself, but before I ask mine, I want to ask if, hearing the different things that you each had to say, do you have questions for each other? Are there things that you heard that make you think, boy, I really want to dig more into that?
I'm going to ask David a question, which could easily apply to Fred. I was really impressed by the quantity of stuff that's involved in trying to transition a business. David, what's the first step?
Well, quite honestly, I think the first step is really, Fred talked about intentional. The business owner has to get over those psychological barriers and hurdles, because I cannot move the needle if we have a business owner who's just not engaged in wanting to plan. There's nothing I can do. I mean, I can certainly use scare tactics, but that only works in the short term. So we really have to work with the business owner to get to the point where they are mentally committed to putting a plan together. To me, that is by far the most important, barrier, is to get through it. Once that process starts, then I kind of talked about the importance of, identifying the successor, what do you need from after-tax dollars, and sort of the timing of it. But once we get past that, again, not to be redundant, once we get past that sort of mental barrier, then it becomes so much easier. It's become so much easier with the business owners engaged.
Well, and that leads really naturally to a question I had jotted down here as you were talking, David, about those emotional barriers. That sounds like a challenge maybe for psychology or psychiatry in addition to the law. Do you ever refer people to say, hey, you should talk to somebody? Is that a thing that might go hand in hand with this?
There has been. We do use some psychological assessments in our practice to kind of understand where the business owner's frame of mind is, and that's really important. So sometimes you can work with that. If we can't get any movement, then there are some professionals out there that are actually specializing in helping business owners and families in their business. So it's a very specific type of practice, and sometimes that is the case. Or sometimes having an independent coach or an independent business advisor, where they're not necessarily work for mom and dad, they're really very independent, and sometimes that could be a great tool to try to, get that momentum.
Yeah. Interesting. That's something I don't think that ever would have occurred to me, that there was that big of a psychological piece. Steve, you had mentioned you talked about systems and developing systems, and I think that must be very important, not only for transitioning ownership in a company, but even just for growing a company or scaling a company. It seems like there need to be systems. What about situations where a company might be run by a solopreneur, somebody who runs an independent financial services business or something like that? How did they develop systems that allow for, and actually more broadly, is there something different for those kind of businesses when you're talking about succession?
Good question. Couple things. One is, if you think about it in terms of the client or the customer, they want to have an experience that you can repeat with the next person. That you want to give them a referable experience. So by to do that, you need a system. It's got to be predictable. Internally, one thought that I would give you, Ernesto, is to outsource. If you're solo, you probably are not great at every element of your work. So find someone, 1099 employee, to take over some of those tasks.
Okay. Moving to Fred, I do hope that someday they pull a fire truck up my last day, as long as it's not being pulled up to put me out. Um, you had mentioned an advisory board, as distinct from a board of trustees. Can you say anything more about like the way that you would use that advisory board, the size of the board, the frequency with which it meets, that sort of thing?
Yes, there has to be some esprit de corps if people are volunteering their time. There has to have a broad-based group of people so that each person participating is learning and is doing it because they enjoy it. There should be a non-disclosure agreement in place because information shared really is confidential and should not be shared with third parties. On occasion, you might invite the CEO or other officers to those meetings, but it's not necessary. It should be a complementary sounding board for your board of directors or owners. It's usually helpful in a situation like you asked about with a smaller group of people or a single owner that is that needs more perspective, because like all of us, to do anything in a silo, it's hard. And what it does is it just broadens it doesn't mean that the comments from the members of the board are necessarily accurate, right? And so you want people that really know what they're doing and don't have big egos and can be discreet. But I'm convinced that if assembled in the right way, can be a huge benefit. And again, in most cases, it's free. And so, people are often doing it for the right reasons.
Okay, we have one, not a question, but a comment. So I'll share that and see if you guys have any comments on the comments. It's from Ed Miles with the New Hampshire Small Business Development Center. To David's point about involving a business advisor, each state also has a SBDC with staff that are skilled in assisting succession planning as well. And I don't know if you've ever worked with any of those groups.
I personally don't have experience, but I appreciate the information.
Okay.
The SBDCs are all around Northern New England. They're outstanding. Typically, they're regional. We have several north of Boston, and yes, to his point, they're often staffed by seasoned professionals, sometimes who have retired. And so again, in like the advisory board, the SBDCs can sit with someone, again, often free as I understand it, and provide sound advice.
Okay. Thank you for the comment, Ed, and to the audience. Anybody else has questions, feel free to put them into the chat. In the meantime, I'm curious if you all could share, if you have examples that come to mind of really successful business succession plans that have effectively preserved the business's values and legacy. Because I think I heard all of you speak to that to some degree. It might not be the most money that you can get out of the succession plan, but the optimal result, and that would presumably include preserving that value and legacy.
Ernesto, I'll start with that. That often is, you can, when if there's a financial transaction involved, price is important. Terms around the price are also important. And then culture comes in there too. And is it a good fit? I have found terms and culture to often kill deals if it's not a good fit. So very important. I would add that that doesn't mean the values or the culture have to be static. I would argue they should evolve. Okay. Once the new owner, new leader steps in, really absorbs what's going on, relies on their prior experience and thinks about the future, their vision, then those vision, the values and the culture should evolve.
Okay. Other Fred or David?
Yeah, I would say that the next generation can be both benefited and burdened by life-changing wealth, and also because the human condition is what it is. Sometimes you have people with physical or emotional disabilities none of the three of us on this panel I would describe as fancy. We're not in New York City. We may be excited about talking about the multi-million-dollar transaction, but we represent real people. And what I would say is that it's not unusual when any of the three of us finish doing a deal that the family then says, listen, we have a situation, we want to put a trust in place so that my kids will be taken care of, because we know after I pass, I'm not going to be in a position to be thoughtful about their future. That's the ultimate affirmation, but it is a moment in time where the three of us, for example, that work together can do that in a way that is lasting.
Hey, I think we have time probably for one more question. So I'm curious what or how you take into account the unexpected. Like I think succession planning, in some cases, you presume that you're planning for something down the road, but something could happen tomorrow, right? An unexpected medical emergency or health issue. How does a business prepare for that? And I mean, maybe that's just as simple as starting early. Fred, you mentioned business trustee. Is that part of the solution there? So I throw it out to all three of you.
I wouldn't mind taking a first bite of the apple. I think when you deal with exit planning, whether or not you're 3 to 5 years out, you always also do contingency planning, sort of in tandem with that. As you've said, bad things happen, right? Things that are unexpected. So what's really important is that every business should have a business will. And that business will is essentially, particularly in a situation where there's one owner. I mean, if you've got a business that has multiple owners and you have a buy-sell agreement, that's going to offer you, quite a bit of protection, risk mitigation there. But if you're just a sole owner, you really need to have a business will as such that if I were to, something unexpected happened tomorrow, what would happen? And there really is a set of instructions that, this is what I want to see happen. I'm going to sell to a competitor. This is the person's name. These are the passwords to my lock system. These are all of the advisors that I have, so that your spouse or your attorney or accountant will have that document in hand. So we know specifically what that owner wants to happen with their business. So I think that's really, really important. And that document, who's going to tell the customers, who's going to tell your vendors, who's going to tell the employees, who's going to sign checks, who's going to enter contracts, who's going to be the interim CEO, who's going to be the interim CFO, those sort of things. Having that all decided ahead of time will lay out the pathway or that contingency plan in order to have a successful exit when the business owner is no longer there.
Makes a lot of sense. So business will.
The business will.
And you can go back and ask yourself, none of us were either emotionally or in business ready for COVID. Let's be honest. But best practices are best practices. And if you think back about your ability to connect through IT, the ability to pay your employees, the ability to bring your team together so that you were thoughtful and supportive, were you ready? Right? That is a fascinating litmus test where you can go back and use that as a case study and then project forward to similar readiness for any type of unforeseen event.
Okay, well, that brings us to the top of the hour, and thank you so much. That went by quickly, and that usually means that the information contained was really interesting. So thank you all for being interesting, and this was really valuable for me, and I am sure it was for our audience. Thank you to our audience as well for being here today. Thank you, David, Frederick, and Stephen. And I am Ernesto Burden, publisher of New Hampshire Business Review. We're grateful to you all for being here. Have a wonderful rest of the day.